At the risk of sounding like I'm defending Donald Trump, there's a point that I want to make that I would like you to keep in mind when you're watching the coverage of Trump's talk about tariffs. As you know, I have been for 20 years or more. I've written several books on this. I've been talking about this on this radio program for 14 years or thereabouts. I am a fan of Alexander Hamilton's American version of what was previously called the Tudor plan of King Henry VII from the 1400s, maybe the 1500s, that King Henry VII basically borrowed from the Dutch trading companies, that the Dutch borrowed from the old Romans. The Romans borrowed it from the Greeks. I mean, this is nothing new. The idea of protecting your domestic markets in the context of manufacturing. And you do that in part with tariffs, with import taxes, border adjustment taxes, whatever you want to call them. And I've been watching the so-called liberal media, MSNBC and CNN principally, having these so-called experts on about this. And they all say, well, you know, there's two things here. If Trump raises the tariffs, number one, we could go into a trade war and, you know, we're not going to get enough food from Mexico and it's going to be a mess. And number two, American consumers are going to be paying that 20%. They are going to be paying, we're going to be paying more on everything that comes from China and everything that comes from Mexico. And suddenly everything in Walmart is going to be more expensive and everything in your supermarket is going to be more expensive and you're going to get screwed. So you don't want to make that happen. You don't want it to go down that road of tariffs, is what they're saying. And they never, ever mention, at least I haven't heard it in 3 days I've been listening and yelling at televisions. They never, ever mention the third option, which is exactly what happened in 1793 when we first put tariffs on imported goods in the United States, and they stood until the 1980s. And that third option is that when you put a tariff on something coming in, say you put a tariff on, you know, they're building small cars in Mexico, right? So say you put a tariff on those cars, or actually cars may even be, you know, too complex an example, but you know, just some small part. Actually, most of the stuff that's coming in from Mexico is actually parts, right? I mean, General Motors, you know, you buy a GM car made in Detroit, and guess what? The engine block was made in China, the transmission was made in Mexico, you know, everything behind the dash was made in Mexico, or some of it's made in Germany, right? So let's say that all of that stuff. All of that stuff now is tariffed. Does that mean that your car is going to cost a lot more to make? Or does that mean that some American entrepreneur is going to say, holy cow, look at this. The tires, the transmission, the engine block, they're all costing 20% more now coming into the United States. I can make them for less than that. I'm going to reopen a factory, or I'm going to build a factory to make these things to sell into the domestic market. It's like everybody has forgotten about free enterprise. Everybody has forgotten about entrepreneurs. I have started 7 businesses in my life, 6 successful businesses, 1 that failed miserably, and I learned a lot from. And every single one of those businesses, when Louise and I started them, the question we asked ourselves is there a market for this product that is unfilled? And when we could answer that question with a yes, we started the business, including this radio show, frankly. And what happens when you put tariffs on products coming into the United States is, yes, the price of those products goes up. But that doesn't mean that everybody just throws their hands up or gets poorer. What it means is that innovators, that entrepreneurs jump in and say, hey, you know, we can make this here now. And we go back to manufacturing in the United States. Now, you know, it may sound like I'm defending Trump. Trump stole this idea from Alexander Hamilton, right? This is not a new idea. And this is something that both Democratic administrations and Republican administrations for years and years and years have supported, and Whig administrations and Federalist administrations, all the way back to the founding of our country. And that really Republicans have only opposed, they've only been in favor of free trade since arguably the Nixon years, certainly the Reagan years. This is relatively new for the Republican Party to love free trade and not believe in entrepreneurialism. And I find it bizarre that our media is just, you know, not talking about this. It's like, yeah, the price will go up. What does that mean? It means opportunity for entrepreneurs in the United States. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California, watching us on free speech on DirecTV. Hey, Marta, what's up?
Hi. Hi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I want to just kind of go along with what you were saying about trade. I heard the speaker that you had on, the right wing speaker for free trade, I'm sorry, and the logical fallacies that he was putting out there just totally took me back to the propaganda lessons that I had in school. And for instance, the anecdotal evidence that CVS, because of jobs coming back, CVS is going to automation, and they're putting robots in instead of human beings.
Right.
And it's like, hello, that's anecdotal evidence.
Well, that's called progress. I mean, you know, arguably it started in, what, I think it was 1783 when James Watt patented the steam engine.
Right. But it's not like the slippery slope argument, and it's just causing, you know, like, oh my gosh, if we bring jobs back, it's just going to be for robots, and then there's the misleading or false generalizations that, like he said, most economists agree free trade benefits Americans. Well, first of all, you know, where are those economists? Who's supporting them?
Yeah.
You know, who do they work for?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's just one right after another. And I was just thinking we need to be prepared, and you're educating us, and I'm starting to write down what you're saying, because I'm hearing liberals and progressives saying, well, free trade is good for the overall economy, and if we don't do it, China is going to become more powerful than us. Do we want China to get all the market? And it's just like such logical fallacies.
Yes, it's nonsense. It really is. And all you have to do is look at the history of trade in the United States. You know, use the United States as the example. We had tariffs that averaged between 20 and 30% from 1793 until the 1980s. And you know, they started dropping in the 70s, actually. But still, you know, we had tariffs to protect domestic industry. And by the way, as the tariffs started dropping in the 70s, guess what also started dropping? American manufacturing. It was 30% of jobs. It was 30% of our economy back in the 1970s. And right now, it's like 11%. It's fallen off the scale.
And one question I would like to ask those people is, do they support child labor making tennis shoes in conditions of poisonous fumes of the glues they use to make those tennis shoes?
Right.
And they're working in sweatshops, and these are a lot of times children. Do you support that? That's what I want to ask people.
Yeah, and because if you're buying clothes, you know, from your discount retail outlets, and they're made in other countries, they're made in low-wage countries. In many of those countries, they're made by children. You're absolutely right. And whether they're made by children or whether they're made by adults, they're made under conditions that are, in some cases, brutal. That are I mean, it's just it's crazy. I'm totally with you, Marta. Thank you very much. Very, very well said.